Hey, all, welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren, I'm your host, and today I've got another couple of great guests on. I have Thea and Amando Lopatka. They are the CEO and co-CEO of Umai dry aging bags. Can't wait to talk to them. I'll be right back with Thea and Amando.
Smoking, grilling, getting hot and hotter, sous vide and chilling from fire and water.
Hey, all, I want to introduce you to a company I just started working with, Fresh Jack's Organic Spices out of Jacksonville, Florida. They're a small, family-run company that's fast-growing. I've tried a bunch of their different seasoning blends and spices, and I can tell you they're all fresh, all organic. None of them contain artificial flavors or sweeteners. None of them have anti-caking agents or preservatives. They all taste like they were just made for you yesterday. Check them out, guys. They're on Amazon in the link below. They have different sample packs, different blends. Like I said, they also have the individual seasonings and spices as well. Fresh Jack's Organic Spices. Check them out, guys. I love them. Welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren. I am your host, of course. And today I have another great guest. I love having all these different guests on that can explain different things to you guys. And this one is a great one because I've been wanting to have her on for a while now. I've used the product. It is Thea. Thea, how do you spell your last name? I don't want to butcher it.
Well, Lopatka. It's pretty phonetic.
Lopatka,
That TK
okay.
kind of trips people up.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thea Lopatka, you are the CEO and founder of Umai dry aging bags. So tell us who you are, where you're from, and all that.
Okay, well, first of all, there's two of us on today. We also have Amando Lopatka Komoda, and as the name gives away, he's the next generation of Umai.
That's me.
Umai's been around since, 2007. We started as a B2B operation, and it was really targeting just industrial use. That was the original idea. Then in 2009, we decided that we'd put up a website, and we happened to put some PayPal buttons on that website. And lo and behold, about 10 days later, we had our first sale. We didn't have packaging, instructions.
Well, I don't think it was even us. It wasn't actually our idea. It was the web developer. I wasn't here at that time. I was kind of in the background. Like it was
Gotcha.
2007. It was kind of something that happened at the dinner table, like folding up bags or helping out in the background. But I remember the web developer said, "Hey, I love this product. I'd love to be able to do this." And he's like the kind of guy who does home brewing and stuff.
Right.
He said, "Can you put some PayPal buttons up?"
And I was like, PayPal buttons?
What's PayPal?
Who buys stuff on PayPal, So that's how we began as an e-commerce business.
Well, let's go back before that. How did you get started even into, where you're at now or where you were then? Were you in business? Were you just kind of looking for a business opportunity? How did that all come about?
Nope, not at all. This is one of the interesting things is a lot of people look for the breadcrumbs that lead to somebody doing whatever them as doing. I actually was trained as a linguist and a cultural anthropologist. I lived in several different countries and taught higher ed for many years. After I moved back to the US, it was basically teaching a lot of foreign graduate students how to adapt to the American university environment and be successful. So that was my background. And I was getting kind of burned out after about 20 some odd years of that. And so I took a little break. Amando at that point wanted to go to an unusual boarding school that was in Ohio, and it was based on a farm. So in order to afford his going to that school, I went as a residential faculty, and living on a farm for 2 years with a whole bunch of adolescents, managing the animals, managing just the household. First of all, it told me I'm really truly done with education. But more than that, it got me to think a lot more about food And actually, because this school was a Montessori program, it was very practical. And one of the big practical elements is that each of the different parts of the farm and the school were called microeconomies. And so it got me thinking more about, business. We think of in like a big definition, business, and you're either in business or you're not in business. But actually, everything we do has to do with the economy that we're generating. So I think it just kind of planted some seeds for me. And as we were wrapping up that experience at the boarding school, at the farm, a college friend of mine contacted me, and he happened to need a Japanese interpreter, which I speak Japanese. So he wanted me to help with some business negotiation that he was doing. And in the process, I realized that I really didn't want to teach anymore. And he realized that I actually had some skill in like doing sales and, figuring things out. So long story short, I decided to come and start a company with a couple of the different business ideas that he had not chosen to invest in or activate. And they were all long shots. And since I was just leaving teaching and I wasn't accustomed to making a great deal of money as a teacher, taking a long shot on a business idea was not a difficult thing for me. So that's really how I started. There was a couple of different ideas. One of them was this weird membrane. It was kind of like Post-it glue. Somebody created it by accident, and they didn't really have an application for it. And one of the ideas was, it could be used in medical applications. It could be used in food applications. Okay, how could it be used in food? Could it be used with vegetables? Could it be used with cheese? Could it be used with meat? And ultimately, we ran some studies with the meat science department at Kansas State University and found that it actually acted as a perfect barrier for contaminants, but it allowed moisture to release and oxygen to exchange so that the meat aged almost exactly as though it were open air aging.
But
so
without any of the bacteria that you would normally get.
Well, if you like to dry age commando style, everything that's floating in the air is landing on top of that meat, and it's a perfect medium for growth. So the Umai dry creates that kind of perfect protected environment for the meat.
Yeah. I like getting into the backstory of people a lot. So if you've ever listened to any of my podcasts, I don't like just to go, how did Umai start? I like to know how you got into it. And that's a great backstory. It's to me, where you came from before is always a good driver. I mean, just like, we were talking about Kenji earlier, I had no idea that he was a architecture major and really never studied, went to culinary school. He just worked in restaurants when he was in college and never went to a formal culinary school. And there's a lot of people out there like that don't really have the type of education maybe you think they did or background. They kind of started from somewhere else. And I really like getting into that because it just shows you that there's many ways your career can go and where you can land, no matter where you start. And you coming from an education background and then now, running a business that's a unique product is just, that's the kind of stuff I really like to get into.
Well, and Darren, another interesting piece of that is, starting from that same farm idea, Amando was a young person at that time, but he took from that experience something that led to his becoming a professional chef. And now he's bringing that expertise to the company.
Well, now he's old. So yeah, look at
ancient.
Him. Old guy. Yeah. You're still a young person. So to me anyway, I'm in my, middle 50s. So anybody younger than 30 is young for me. So let's talk a little bit about that. So when you got this idea, or you kind of were working with your friend there, did he help you get started, with the business? Did he give you any kind of help, or did he just say, okay, go ahead and run with it? That's fine.
It's interesting. Starting a business really is about being organized, being curious, being tenacious. And so from being a researcher, being an academic, I had all of those skills. And when you need to go out and learn about a whole new industry or a whole new world, having the skills that I had as a cultural anthropologist is the best background. I knew how to ask questions. I knew how to adapt to different environments. So I could go into the, R&D labs at Cargill and Tyson and just strike up a conversation and learn from these guys what they thought about the meat, what they thought about the bag, what they were looking for. So the friend gave me an idea, but the friend didn't make any significant investment or provide any business guidance per se. And I've just, I've taken the slow path, definitely. From 2007 till now, it's a very slow way to grow a business. A lot of people would have gone, big splash and,
Right.
dropped a bunch of money on advertising. And I felt it was very important to learn incrementally from the customers how this bag works for them. And so I think as we start to get some copycats now coming onto the market, the value of Umai Dry is that we have now 13 years of experience of supporting customers' success. You can't synthesize that.
Right. Yeah. You guys have done a lot of the back research and testing and everything that's come up in those 13 years you've had to deal with. And like I said, I think I talked to you about this before. I see the dry age bag people out there. And if you go to their website, it's just nowhere near as in depth as what you guys have. And so there's really something to be, the original and also to be as in depth and offer the amount of different products and help that you guys do, because, it can be kind of scary. And I want to start back at the beginning. So Umai Dry bags are dry aging bags. And I think you started out with just dry aging beef, correct? Is that what it kind of started out as?
Right.
And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so people can see what we're talking about here that are on the video. So this is your website, and you do offer more than just dry aged, beef bags now. I mean, you've got the charcuterie and the salumi ones. So you offer a lot of different products and even like seasoning blends for all that stuff. So when you were starting out and you were building this, you said most of it was on the commercial side, correct?
Yeah, the original idea was strictly for dry aging beef.
Commercially.
Well, and our assumption was that most home users don't want to go out and buy a full subprimal steak cut, a whole boneless ribeye or a whole strip loin or a whole sirloin, and take up all that space in their fridge, right? And we thought the real market would be with the, commercial users. What we quickly learned, though, was that they don't want to hold on to that meat because that meat is money. And
Right.
as you know, you got to hold on to that meat for, ideally 35 to 45 days, right? That's a lot of money sitting on the shelves. So the big meat distributors really didn't want it. The really large restaurants, back in 2007, 2008, dry aging was still, most people were like, what do you mean, jerky? People didn't get it, right? I mean, the concept of dry aged beef kind of died in the 1960s with the advent of plastic. And so unless you were living in New York or New Jersey or some very specialized restaurants, dry aged beef had all but become extinct.
Right.
Well, and also the advent of refrigeration really kind of killed off the beef industry a little bit, or it changed the beef industry rather, because you could have refrigerated train cars, so you could transport all this meat a little bit further. So it just kind of changed things up. I mean, coming from restaurants very recently, the restaurant that I was working at, I was lucky. It was a high-end restaurant. Like, we cooked on fire and did all the fancy kind of cool YouTube video looking things. But we had a room downstairs that was just dedicated to dry aging, and it was the old style of dry aging, so it was very messy and lots of mold growth everywhere. It had what was the word? The verbiage we used was it had a very unique ecosystem.
Yeah.
It
had its own ecosystem. That's what they say. And if you go
exactly, yeah.
There's a lot of restaurants that still have, and there's some actual companies that have big dry aging rooms, and
It's coming back.
Yeah, it's coming back. And back, I've talked about this with some others before, is that everything used to be dry aged back,
Exactly.
20, 30 years ago. All the beef was dry aged before box beef became, big.
Yeah.
They hung it. I mean, the steer that I just bought, I just had a full steer from a friend of mine. He raises cattle, and I bought it and had it processed. I had him hang it for 2 weeks before he even, looked at it. Cut the, everything off, but I had both the whole, carcass just hanging for 2 weeks before he even cut into it. So, but it's hard to do that. And Costco is the big, one you can point out is they slaughter their beef within 2 days. It's cut up and sent out to the stores. And that's one of the reasons why they blade tenderize their steaks. And if you buy any of their primals or, subprimals, you're going to have to throw it in your refrigerator for at least a week in the cryo pack to wet age it, because it's so green that they don't let it hang at all, because it's like you said, they want it gone. They see meat is money. And as soon as you get it out through the dealer or the store's doors into a customer's cart, the quicker they can turn over that money. But
Exactly.
it doesn't turn out a better product for sure. They have prime beef that's, lower end prime, but still, I mean, if you don't throw that full primal in your, refrigerator and let it sit there for a week, it's not as good.
I mean, we propose you let it sit for a lot longer, but in our plastic.
Yes, exactly. But if you're not at least wet aging it for at least a week, it's just.
It's too
And
green.
I never buy their cut steaks, because they blade tenderize them. And the reason they do that is because they know it's not aged enough to tenderize it all. It's just,
Right.
it's tough. You can get a filet mignon that's tough because it's, fairly new, but they'll blade tenderize it, which opens up, a whole other world of pathogens could get in there and all that. So,
Oh yeah. It's basically you're eating intact hamburger,
right, exactly. And
Yeah.
it changes the texture of the steaks, and there's a whole multitude of reasons why to not, and like I said, I'll buy ground beef from Costco, and I'll buy the subprimals, and but that's it. I mean, but now I don't have to for at least a year, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But
But Darren, what people forgot, I mean, I'm old enough, and maybe you're old enough, that there was a different flavor to beef into the mid 1960s or so. And I remember my dad going down to the butcher and telling them to hang it. I didn't know what it meant. He's like, hang it 21 days, hang it for a month. And I remember he would order his beef that way. But it wasn't until the first time that in about 2007 that I bought a dry aged steak, because we're in Minnesota, and there's a very good grocery store that used to sell dry aged beef. Actually, now that there's this uptick in dry aged beef, they're not selling it anymore. It's kind of strange. But so 2007, I got a dry aged steak, and I compared it to a wet, quote, wet aged steak, right? And I remembered that flavor. I mean, I didn't even know that I had a memory of beef tasting different. And eating that piece of dry aged steak, I was like, I don't really like beef that much. But when I tasted that, that's how beef used to taste. And so the thing is, our palate over the past 50 years has changed so that most of us only know beef as having that kind of vaguely metallic, kind of serumy taste that happens if you age under vacuum in an anaerobic environment. But if you expose it to oxygen, three things start to change. You got that tenderizing, of course. The enzymes are much more active. It breaks down the muscle fibers, which has to happen. And it happens more effectively with oxygen exposure, right? And then you've got that reduction of moisture if you're dry aging. So the beefiness just gets more intensified, right? And then the third thing is the fat starts to oxidize. And it lends that kind of acorn, nutty, earthy taste to the meat. And then, of course, there's, mold and different, positive flavor changes that happen. But at a minimum, you've got that tenderization, that deepening of the beef flavor, and then the oxidation that gives it the earthiness. And that's what beef, I think, used to taste like. And they very effectively helped us forget that with wrapping it in plastic and selling it to us that way. So sorry to get on my soapbox about
No,
that.
and that's where the box beef comes in. Instead of
Exactly.
where your butcher or even the grocery stores. My uncle was a butcher for a big grocery store chain up in upstate New York, and I remember back even in the 70s, they would get carcasses and half carcasses and process them in the stores. But nowadays it's all box beef. They get the primals and subprimals in a big box, and they're just meat cutters. They just cut the steaks, or the roasts into certain sizes.
Yep.
So that's all they do anymore. And if you go to a butcher, even a guy that has a butcher shop. I mean, I went to a guy that was supposed to be a butcher for the last 20 years, and I asked him for a tri-tip, and I didn't watch what he gave me until I got home, and I unwrapped it from the butcher paper, and it was a picanha. It was a top sirloin cap, roast, and he didn't even know what
the difference.
He didn't know what a tri-tip was, and he's supposed to be a butcher for 20 years, and he really wasn't. He just took it out of a box and thought, oh, that's a triangle, so that's got to be a tri-tip, but it's not. So, so there's just a lot of, uneducation out there because they don't need to. They don't need to know. They just whatever's in the box, they just cut it up how thick do you want your steaks is it. So that's all they know anymore.
It's paint by number. They can only paint with the colors they have in the box.
But the good thing is I see a lot more of that. And if you go to YouTube, you can type in seam butchery and you watch all these younger guys that are getting back into that, being able to take a half a carcass and break it down with just a knife and by the seams and pull these muscle groups apart and show you, what a chuck, in that chuck section, how many good actual really tender steaks there are in that.
I feel really spoiled right now. Sorry. Coming from high-end restaurants, I worked with butchers. Like I worked alongside, followed behind, kind of like watched what he was doing, not actually working with him. This great butcher at my last restaurant, and he was amazing. I mean, he was a butcher through and through. And I remember this one story. He used to have this longer hair, and he came in one day and it was all chopped off. I'm like, what happened? He's like, oh, my wife made me chop it off because I was putting beef fat in my hair as like a conditioner, and it was getting all over the furniture. So she gave me the option to either cut it off or put like little covers on all the furniture. I'm like, that is the weirdest thing. Like, you must really love everything you're doing with beef. But he was amazing to watch because we would get in whole, like half pigs or half cows, and they'd break them down right there, and we'd break them down into the subprimals, obviously, or we just, like, one of the most popular things we had were flat irons. And so the flat iron steak it's like the second most tender steak in a cow. I think it's one of my favorites. Bavette is my number one favorite, but that's neither here nor there. A flat iron is a tricky one because it's on the blade. It's kind of like two strips of meat bisected by a bunch of tendon, and it's really on the blade. So you just take the entire blade off and you kind of hang it for a while. And then to get it off, you cut the fat off of the outside, and then you have to like strip down one side of the tendon and take off this little, maybe inch thick piece of meat, and then remove it from the blade and then strip off the other side. And the entire process takes, just for what comes out to like 4 or 5 4-ounce, 6-ounce steaks, it takes like 20 minutes for a trained person to really go through there and get it out. And it's just an amazing process to see that up front. And now I'm hearing that that's not even a widespread thing. And I feel,
well, it's starting to become more, because it used to be that they didn't. They just throw the whole chuck, into for ground beef, and not, or just cut it up into chuck roast, which is kind of silly. But you got places now like Porter Road online meat purveyors that do a lot of seam butchery, and they pull those things out that you can't find in a store. You can't go to a grocery store and find some of those cuts that you're talking about. A hanger steak. They don't know what a hanger steak is. They don't know what a bavette steak is. They don't know what flat irons are. There's specialty places that actually do seam butchery, but the main places they get their beef. They don't know how to do that. And the people in the stores and like a regular, a grocery store, they don't know how to do that stuff. So you won't see it at your local store. That's for sure. But I love that. I love that kind of stuff. And I love watching, people do that, but it's becoming more popular and people know about it now instead of, and it's fun for me. I just did an episode last week where a couple of buddies of mine, we talked about all the different steak cuts and all that and where they come from and how to pull them out. But so let's get back into dry aging. So Umai Dry is a dry aging system. It's a bag. What makes it different than traditional dry aging?
Well, it doesn't smell up your kitchen or your fridge. Traditional dry aging, you took a large piece of meat. Traditionally, you'd hang like a half aside, but then you'd end up with a lot of meat that really wasn't steak quality that was dry aged, and it didn't necessarily enhance it or give it, you couldn't justify the trim loss and the shrink from the moisture loss, right? So with Umai Dry, you take advantage of boxed beef. You take that subprimal cut that's perfect for steak. You take it in the cryovac packaging that would normally have to be trimmed up quite a bit. A lot of bits come off that to go in the hamburger bin or the stew meat bin, right? You take that whole thing and you dry age it, and you control the time. So you control what meat you age, you control how long you age it, and you get to watch that whole process as it evolves into that, dark mahogany brown, piece of gold. And then you also get to decide how big you want those steaks, right? Mm-hmm. So there's very little waste. There's a true improvement of the meat experience. I mean, you're really honoring that animal that gave you that huge piece of meat by dry aging it. And Umai Dry just makes it safe and easy because we are very, we have become a population that's very concerned about food safety. Sometimes rightfully so, sometimes overly concerned, sometimes really off the mark. But Umai Dry is just a simple way of providing that, that reassurance that this is safe and easy, and you have control over all the critical elements.
One of the things I really love about your website, especially, is that you have all the videos, the how-to videos, and they walk you through it, in fine detail so that anybody can feel comfortable doing it.
Well, that's the teacher, right?
Yeah, that's the teacher part of it.
Yeah.
You can definitely tell. I've watched a lot of your videos, and that's the teacher part. But it's true, though. It makes people feel real comfortable. They can, they understand that, if they just took that same, primal and stuck it in their refrigerator in their garage and just let it sit there, that it's not going to be safe because there's all sorts of other, stuff in that, refrigerator that they got drinks in there. They've got other foods and other things and other stuff floating around in there that they really don't want on that meat. So the Umai Dry makes it to where I can still have my beer and sodas out in that refrigerator and still be, safe with having that in there as well. So
yeah. Interesting anecdote, but there's a restaurant in Chicago that actually holds the patent for that Himalayan salt block idea that everybody has right now, David Burke's. And I worked with their chef for a couple of years doing different tests in their environment. And he told me, you know why they first installed that Himalayan salt block wall? They were storing in that same walk-in fridge, they were storing all kinds of other products. They were storing their vegetables. They were storing, the cardboard boxes of pre-cut steaks they got from other places. And they had a flavor analysis done of the meat that was dry aging in that environment. And when the spectrum of flavors was pulled out of it scientifically, they found that one of the predominant flavors in the beef was actually cardboard.
Nice.
Yeah. So they put the salt in there to neutralize that exchange of the stuff that's floating around in the air. And then, of course, then they later segregated the room off, and then they patented the wall. And now everybody thinks that you got to have Himalayan salt to do it right. But all the salt does is it really just neutralizes the environment, and it doesn't cleanse it, doesn't make it sterile by any means, and it doesn't really dehumidify it. Those are all myths, but they did find that, yeah, all those flavors are just floating around in the air and you don't even know. In your garage, I wouldn't be as concerned about the drinks and the cardboard and stuff. I'd be more concerned about all the stuff that's on the tires of your car,
Right.
that are floating around, and they're, whooshing in and out of that fridge every time you open and close it. I don't think there's anything wrong with commando dry aging. I think there's definitely a place for it. And I really commend the people that like doing that. Umai dry is just a different way to do it. It just gives you a measure of safety. That's all.
Well, and you don't need special equipment. You need a bag, and I've seen people, I'm in some of the dry age Facebook groups, and I see these guys buy, separate beverage coolers with all kinds of fans and humidifiers and things that they put in there. And then you can buy the, dedicated steak ager type refrigerators that are made for that. But they're $700, $800, $1,200, $1,500. And
exactly.
if you want to spend that money, that's more than, you go right ahead. But somebody like me, I'm not dry aging everything that comes in my house. There's certain things I like dry aged, and I'll do it occasionally. So my dry makes it to where somebody like me who doesn't want to have to spend all this money on special equipment and all that kind of stuff and learn about, the proper humidity and all that has to be in there. I can just throw it in that bag, toss it out in my refrigerator, and then wait 30 days, pull it out, cut it up, and be fine.
It's foolproof. Yeah.
I do think it's funny. If you have the space and you have the financial means to have one of those refrigerators, that's great. It's just that you still have to clean it too. I mean,
right.
The traditional or commando way of dry aging beef is fine. It just gets really messy. And of course, there's that last bit there is the trim loss. Regardless of however you're going to be dry aging, you're always going to have that little piece of the pellicle or that bark on the outside. And if you do the traditional way of doing it, a lot of stuff is going to grow, or something's going to grow. And more often than not, you're going to have to cut off more of the outside. And you're going to be losing out on more of your steak because you have to take all that stuff off. With the Umai dry material, the trim loss is a lot less because it's just a bark. I mean, it's very thin. And of course, when you're dry aging, you have a steak that goes from about this, and you're bringing it down here. So when you're cutting off that little bit more, that's actually a lot of steak.
And that's one thing I don't think people realize. That's why dry aged steaks cost more, is because you're spending a lot of money on a bigger subprimal, and then you're shrinking it down. So you're starting with a lot more pounds when you first do it, and then you end up with a lot less because of the evaporation. It's not.
Yeah. And there's storage fee. I mean, it takes up space. I mean, I don't know how many restaurant back ends you've been in, but kitchens are they're crowded. I mean, there's not a whole lot of space to swing your arms or store a steak for months on end, or weeks, depending on how far you're going.
I've been to what's the place in Brooklyn, New York, Peter Luger.
Luger, yeah.
I went to Luger's a couple of years ago, and they dry age their stuff. They've got their dry age room. I didn't get to go in it. They don't let the people come in there, but I'm sure it smells pretty bad when you go in there.
I think they smell pretty nice. I don't know if it's something akin to like Stockholm syndrome, but I actually like the smell of dry aging rooms. Being stuck in one for long enough, you just you have to learn to love it, or you might go crazy, kind of thing. I don't know. I like it. It's definitely unique.
Yeah. So let's go down that rabbit hole. So with dry aging, you can do it pretty much as long as you like, especially if you're, doing it in your own refrigerator with my dry bag. So what is your favorite? I mean, I've tried some. I've actually done a brisket up to like 45 days. And I know that there's others that done over 60 days. I think Guga's done a couple for longer. He's done some stuff. So what do you guys think the longer you go? Now, I know when you're using the Umai dry bag, it makes it a little different because you're not getting that mold and other stuff that would add to the flavor. What do you guys think? How long is too long? How short is too short?
Well, it's a bit like any fine food that you're going to experience. If you're going to take scotch, right, you're not going to start off with something super peaty. You're never going to start off with a Freud. I mean, you're just going to be turned off of scotch just because of that. I feel you'd start off with something a little simpler, a little sweeter, then you start working your way up. Or cheeses, you're not going to start off with the stinkiest cheese you can find in the cellar. You know, the kind of like chemical warfare ones. Like
Right.
you'd never start with that. And you're going to work your way up to that. So with dry aging beef, it's very similar. You're going to want to start at like the 3 or 4 week kind of mark. Personally, depending on the fat content, I like things closer to like 75, 90 days. If it's got a lot of fat, I want to go a little bit longer because that nuttiness that the fat takes on is really the reason why I love dry aged steaks. If it's going to be like a leaner cut, I'll probably stay a little bit closer to the 60, 75 day mark. But that's just because I've been around it for long enough that my taste is kind of built up to that point. If you start somebody off at that,
Yeah.
I've seen people like try like 100-day dried steak as their very first experience with dried steak,
What a
and
waste.
they swear off it forever because they're like,
Yeah.
this is too strong. Like the flavor is just complete. They've no frame of reference to start off with, and when you start off, so strong, it's just too much.
Yeah,
But
it's like hitting them in the head with a bat, and then they go,
Yeah,
I don't like dry
flavor
age.
that, yeah.
But then they just, I don't like dry age because of that one experience I had. But yeah, definitely.
Exactly, yeah.
And some of the old timers that I've talked to, they've been interested in Umai dry because they say as they got older, digesting, the typically open air aged beef is harder because it has a lot more funk to it.
Huh.
And they'll say that it's well, actually literally what they tell me is I don't like the belch the next day, they would say, right? So for me personally, I really prefer around 35, 40 days. I think it gives the right balance of improvement for me without taking it too far. When you get to about 60 days, there's some flavor in there they're too strong for me. I don't appreciate them very
I
much.
like them.
We do have customers, though, even commercial customers who go as far as 100 days. But again, they need the right audience who know what they're eating.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, one of the reports that they got back from their flavor profile test was that it tastes peanut buttery at 100 days. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound like the beef, improved if you did that.
Right.
I do warn people though, early on we were telling people 14, 21, 28 days. Because a lot of restaurants actually only age about 10 to 14 days, right? But we realized that if you put the meat in an umai bag and you invest in that experience and you only go 14 or 21 days, it's not very impressive.
Yeah, it's not changing enough. And
Yeah. So that's why I kind of tell people, and again, I've heard from chef after chef after chef, 35 to 45 is the sweet spot. You're going to please the most customers if you stick to that range. And I agree. Yeah, around 35, 40 days is good for me.
I think, 30 days is probably the minimum I would ever go because, like you said, and especially, if they're buying something like from Costco where it has no age to it at all. So you're starting now. I just, got my steer.
Close to green.
I had my steer aged, at the processor for 2 weeks. So it's already got 2 weeks. It's not typically, or technically dry age like it would be in the Umai, but it's still hanging in an age that it has some of that. So I don't really technically, it's going to be a lot better for me to have it at 30 days. It's going to be more like a 40-day one because it's the jump start I kind of gave it. So I definitely think that there is just like anything, it's personal taste. And, like you said, with cheeses, some people don't like, Roquefort or, blue cheese, but they love, provolone or something a little bit more intense, but not quite. So it's all personal taste. And if they have a bad experience because they went and they got a 200-day dry aged steak and, it could turn them off. But I see a lot of crazy things, especially nowadays with you got more of these celebrity chefs. They're trying to make a name for themselves. I watched this Netflix special just recently that the guy said it was a 200 or 300 day dry aged steak, but what he did was he only did like 30 days dry aged it, and then he covered it in fat and then pretty much wet aged it the rest of the way. What is your thoughts of these, seeing these butter age, these silly gimmicky things that's I know what they are. They're silly and gimmicky, but people see that stuff because
They're
it's
experiments. It's fun. I think there's nothing wrong with that,
But it's not really technically dry age. It's not doing anything. It's just like I said, it's more of wet aging. If you're only dry aging it, literally dry aging it for 30 days, and then you're covering it in fat or butter, or even putting it in a regular vacuum bag and letting it sit there, it's not the same effect as if you let it just dry age. So,
well, I mean, the point is, can moisture permeate? Yes or no? Yes, that's dry aging. If it's not, then it's not really dry aging.
Yeah, and it can't through butter or fat or anything like that. Hey, I want to welcome back Inkbird Products as a sponsor of the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. Inkbird makes some great thermometers, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all that. But they also make a great instant read thermometer that I really love. It's waterproof, totally rechargeable with USB, very accurate. Everybody should have one of these in their kitchen so they can check the internal temperatures of their food so they don't end up overcooking. Check out the waterproof instant read thermometer below and a link to Amazon from Inkbird. Welcome back, Inkbird Products. So what's other types of meat, since we're talking about that, other types of meat that could be used in the dry age bags? Can you do lamb? Can you do fish? Can you do chicken? I mean, what is not
You
really...
cannot dry age poultry or fish.
Okay.
I'm going to say you can't dry age them. Okay. You can cure and dry. That's a very different process. You can definitely dry age lamb. It starts pretty small, and so it gets smaller. You need to be aware of that.
Yeah, the shrinkage. You always got to look at the shrinkage factor. That's for sure.
Right, right. Probably a critical thing to bring up, though, is technically you can dry age pork, but it's not good to dry age standard American commodity pork. Those breeds do not do well. The meat is, again, if you're curing pork, it's nice to cure because it takes up the moisture really easily. It takes up the salt, rather. It takes up the cure because of how the cells are, how the meat is. When you dry age, that character is not a good thing. The porousness of the muscle is not a good thing. So what we've learned is if you want to dry age pork, you really need to seek out low pH. High pH.
More
anyway,
acidic, low acidic.
Basically, you need to search out Duroc and Berkshire.
Yeah, the heritage breeds.
You can source those two breeds.
Yeah.
You can dry age them, but you want to dry age them for a much, much shorter period of time than you do beef.
And in all the kinds of heritage pork that they are out there, those are pretty common.
Right.
You still have to seek them out. If you go into your Costco and you buy a piece of pork and you want to dry age it, you're not going to be very successful.
Yeah, you definitely can find it online, or you might be able to go to a high-end butcher and he can order it for you. But yeah, you're not going into a Publix or any shopping, any grocery store, and it's not going to be on the shelf. Occasionally they might get something special in, but and usually, like you said, it's got to be a big chunk. You don't, because you got to.
That's the important thing. I think that's the most important thing is people want to dry age, but they don't necessarily want to spend the money up front on an experiment. Well, you can't really dry age a smaller piece of meat. So that's critical to know. Another thing is, so definitely beef, definitely lamb, certain kinds of pork. You can also dry age game. You can do venison if you catch them before they break the animal down into small pieces, right?
Right.
And we've had some customers that will do like moose or caribou. The thing to remember, though, is whatever flavor is in that meat is going to be intensified by dry aging. So you better be sure that you like that. We actually had a customer on the forum last week who was asking, it's an unusual question, but it's been asked before about dry aging beef. Bear. Dry aging bear. And, pretty much everybody who's ever piped in on that topic has said, no, that is not a flavor you want to intensify. No.
Yeah. I mean, because, elk and deer and all that is gamey to begin with, and you're going to make it even more gamey.
Exactly.
And bison is the same way. Even though it's a red meat, it's still kind of gamey. It's still very lean, and so it's going to have a different flavor for sure. If you gotta, like you said, you gotta make sure you like that flavor because it's going to intensify a lot more. So
again, it's the fat. I mean, you need the fat in there for it to be for really that nutty kind of dry aged flavor. If you take something as lean as bison, I wouldn't recommend aging it very long.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't add a lot. The other thing to mention, Darren, is, Umai Dry is an international company. So about 35% of our clients are outside of the US. And outside of the US, grain finishing animals is not that common. We have the wealth in this country that we can feed the grain to the animals. Usually that's not something people do. Or they have much more big open spaces like Australia. I mean, Australian beef feeds all of Asia. And definitely there's a huge market for dry aging, but it's a very different experience to dry age grass-fed beef. Right. Or, as I said, Australia's feeding the rest of Asia, so they're sourcing all that meat frozen already. It's a very different experience to have the meat frozen once, thawed, then dry aged. But it improves it all the same.
Well, let's get back to that's just one thing I see that comes up all the time in a lot of the Facebook groups and online stuff is, people, why can't I dry age individual steaks? If I go buy, 6 steaks at Costco, why can't I dry age them?
Well, the short answer is you can do anything you want to do. Absolutely. We're not the steak police,
right.
But the long answer is, okay, dry aging is giving it time for the texture to improve. So the enzymes have to have the time to break down the fibers. Giving it time for the moisture to reduce so that beefy flavor gets intensified. And then third, having the proper ratio of fat in there so that will oxidize and develop those other flavor nuances. If you dry age a single steak, and you want to go the right amount of time to get the flavor, the texture to actually tenderize, that thing is going to become shoe leather. And most of that pellicle, that outside bark, is inedible. If you want to dry age it for a short period of time and just lose some of the moisture so that the flavor intensifies, that's actually what we recommend for tenderloin, because you don't really want to waste 1 ounce of that expensive meat, and the texture doesn't get better anyway. So just do a short dry age, lose some of the moisture, intensify the flavor, don't develop a pellicle, a bark on the outside. You could definitely do that. But if you want to have that fat transform the flavor and create those really nice nuances, you can't leave a single steak that long. So we've done quite a bit of testing the past year because we really wanted to help people that want to try to dry age, but they don't want to invest in a whole subprimal. And, basically the only way to do it is to go to a butcher and get like a 3-inch steak. Well, by the time you're buying a 3-inch steak, it's been handled a lot. It's been trimmed. It's going to cost a lot to get. And then you want to dry age that, it's not optimal. So
yeah. You're going to lose a lot just in trimming off the pellicle, like you said. And I've actually seen people, if you just go and you buy like a prime rib roast, it's not the full primal, but it's, a good, maybe 3 or 4 bone. I mean, if you want to try it out, that's what I tell people to do. Because that way you're only spending $30-$40, at the most, if it's prime or, higher end choice. So that way you can do it. But, to try to do it with single steaks is just kind of like you said. If you only wanted to do it for a couple of weeks, maybe, and where you're not having to trim it, I mean, you can go right ahead. Is it going to improve it that much? It's not going to be the same experience.
No, you're going to end up with less than a hockey puck.
Yeah. So it's not going to be the same experience as you would get by doing it the regular way. I just wanted to touch on that. I knew what it was, but I mean, it's just, people just don't understand that you're losing moisture and it's shrinking and you're developing that extra rotted meat on the outside that you got to trim off. Now, using that, the pellicle, as you call it, the stuff you're trimming off the outside, there's people who will argue that it shouldn't be called a pellicle, but because the definition of pellicle is not.
Oh, it's pellicle bark.
I
But
call it bark.
now
but
people use that. They trim it and they'll actually grind it up into with some other like top round or something like that to into ground beef. Is there anything wrong doing that?
So this is where I have to switch hats from Thea to owner of a company in the United States of America in 2020, right?
Liability.
And all I can say is we don't recommend the bark for human consumption, right? Obviously, people can do whatever they want, and they will. And I save all the trimmings, and I have the happiest dog in the world, But unfortunately, it's not something we can suggest people do because we don't have any way of knowing how they've handled the meat before they put it in the bag.
Right.
So part of that measure of safety that we like to ensure so that everybody has success is trim it. The beautiful thing about Umai Dry, one of the very first thing that came out of the meat science studies was they were amazed at the minimal trim loss when you dry age with Umai Dry. Like Amando said, when you open air dry age, that bark goes really deep and it also stays kind of soft. So trimming it effectively is very difficult. If you use Umai Dry, you get a thin bark and it's almost crispy dry. That's why we call it, bark, because it has kind of a hardness to it. And the old meat cutters that we've worked with who had traditionally dry aged and Umai dry aged side by side, and they went to trim them, they were so pleased by how easy it was to just like flick off that nice bark from the Umai dry aged. So ultimately, it's not that much trim loss and you're going to be safe. But again, to the people who want to do everything with every ounce of that meat, I wish you luck.
So let's get into the charcuterie part of it. You guys also do that. When did you start promoting or doing that? Was that from the beginning, or is that something you discovered that?
No, we introduced the charcuterie application in about, I'm going to say 2012, 2013. Yeah, that's about the time we started doing that. And we evolved a lot. I mean, we've kept everything on the YouTube channel so you can see all of our early mistakes. Like we did the salt.
I do that with my YouTube channel.
Oh my gosh, we did the
first video
method. It was just disgusting, right? And then we also we'd make charcuterie and then we'd trim it by hand with a knife. And if charcuterie isn't paper thin, it doesn't taste good. It just tastes like a mouthful of salt. You don't get all that beautiful nuance of flavor. So about 2013, I think we released the charcuterie application, and then maybe a year or so later, we released the salumi application. So a way to make, genuine, slow fermented, slow dried sausage without a cellar. So we've and so far we're the only people that have. Oh, did we lose you?
No.
Nope. I'm just sharing the screen so people can
Thanks.
see what we're talking about if they're on the video
Too many Zoom calls these days.
Some people might not know what charcuterie is, right? So what's
charcuterie. So basically, charcuterie and salumi are actually the same thing. One is French, charcuterie, it means preserved meat. One is Italian, salumi, means preserved meat. What we've decided to do is charcuterie is whole muscle, 2-week cured, dried in Umai Dry. And I would say 90% of the customers are doing are doing pork, because charcuterie is almost all pork. You can do some beef, bresaola, you can do some duck, or you can actually do whatever you want. But most of the time, charcuterie is pork.
Well, in the States, it's definitely just pork and beef for the most part. Other places in the world, especially Italy, you're going to find all sorts of other things. You're going to find, lamb and boar, and it's kind of piggy, I guess, but you're going to find all sorts of other meats. Yeah, venison, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, you go into the grocery store in Switzerland and you're going to find, in the area where Americans would look for bologna, you're going to get cured venison, cured beef, cured boar. There's all kinds of options. So anyway, so for Umai Dry, the charcuterie product line is for whole muscle, cured meat that you cure for 2 weeks under vacuum or in a Ziploc bag in the fridge. Then you rinse off the cure, you put it into the Umai dry, you measure the weight, you put it in your fridge on the open wire rack, just like dry aging, and you let it go until it's lost 35 to 40% of its original moisture, its weight,
Yeah.
And then you either have a home slicer or you take it to your local deli and ask them if they slice it up pretty for you. And it's a really beautiful experience. If you've only had like American made charcuterie, American pancetta or something like that, you don't really know what all the different flavor dimensions are that happen in meat when you let it age that long.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think charcuterie is a little more accessible too. That's kind of the point we've been talking a lot about dry aging beef, right? And the expense where you have to go and you have to get the whole subprimal and you have to get, this big, I don't know, $200 piece of meat from Costco or from wherever you can find it. And you have to dedicate all that space in your refrigerator. I mean, that's a considerable amount of space. You have to dedicate that to your beef for an extended period of time. Whereas with charcuterie, I mean, if you do something as small as duck breast, like duck breast prosciutto is one of my favorite. That takes up, I don't know, maybe less than 6 inches by 4 inches, and only for a couple of weeks. Less time, more time. Okay, more time, but less space.
Yeah.
Now you guys offer like with the salumi, you offer like all the cures and the.
Yeah. So for the charcuterie, we offer the Instacure #2 to keep it safe, and that's part of the kit. But we've also found that because of the very specific proportions of salt and curing salt that you need, it would be helpful it was helpful to customers to give them pre-mixed curing salt blend. So we released that several years ago, and that's been a really big hit. So we've already got the 3% salt, 0.25% Instacure #2, slow acting curing salt, and it's blended for 5 pounds. So you go get your 5-pound piece of meat, you toss it in that, and then either you can use one of the recipes on our recipe archive, or if you buy the kit, it actually comes with a list of recipes. You can use those different spice combinations, or actually, today, we just released a new product.
I saw that. I got the email.
Yeah, I didn't know this was going to be a sales pitch. No. But yeah, Umai Dry now offers 3 different charcuterie spice blends. So for traditional capicola, which is by far the most popular charcuterie in the US, either capicola or lonzino, which is made with a piece of pork loin, really easy to get a 5-pound piece of pork loin, or brezola. That's the one that's made with beef, eye of round. So we now offer those 3 spice blends. And actually the packet, although it's for 5 pounds, the packet has the volume measurement. So you can just take out 6 teaspoons for 1 pound of meat if you want to do that. So we've tried to make it now so that you can get the Umai bags in the smaller size for charcuterie, and then just get the premixed salts and the spice blend, and away you go. We've done the same for salumi from the beginning, actually, where we have a kit that includes all the pieces you need. So for salumi, because it's fermented to drop the pH to get that nice tartness to the flavor and create a pathogen barrier, that includes, you need the salt, the kosher salt, you need the Instacure #2, but you also need starter culture. So it's basically your yeast if you were baking. So we include a specific meat starter culture that works at room temperature. And then you also get some powdered dextrose, which is just a little added sugar for the culture. So you're feeding the little beasties. And you mix that in. And over the course of the first 48 to 72 hours at room temperature, that sausage is going to ferment and develop a really good flavor and become much safer. And then you put it in the fridge and again, dry it to the target weight of 35 to 40% weight loss.
Yeah, because on things like that, that's the stuff you would see like in the Italian deli hanging on the strings.
You got it. Exactly. That's
where they normally ferment there, when they're hanging them in their shop.
Well, actually, the fermentation has to happen at the beginning of the process.
Gotcha.
And when it's hanging there for display for you, that means it's already lost all that moisture so that it's shelf stable. When you lose that 35 to 40% moisture, you have very low water activity, and it makes the thing, well, technically last forever, but
so
it basically fossilizes if you go too much further. Yeah.
So dry aging steaks is simple and straightforward in that you just dry it for a set amount of time. And then you get into the charcuterie and salumi, or the sausage aspect of it. And that's where there's a lot of science on. You have to have a precise digital scale. And you're talking about target weights.
It's like baking. Yeah, it's like baking. When if you're a cook, baking and cooking is totally different.
Oh yeah, I mean, as a cook, we refer to the pastry chefs as they're magicians, because they do some weird magic, and all of a sudden they have fluffy meringues and all that cool stuff. And I'm sure they're looking at us like grass is greener. I hope, probably not, but it's But the charcuterie side, I think it's a lot of fun because it's you got to use less product and you got to be more specific about it, right? You have to be really careful about all the little bits and pieces that you're putting into that, and you have to understand the science behind it. I guess you don't have to, but it really does help. I mean, Thea was mentioning words like water activity, right? And why we're using dextrose, why we're using back to firm TSPX, that's starter culture, why we're using Insecure number 2. What's the difference between Insecure 2 and 1? I mean, it's a lot of science and it's a lot of fun. Personally,
for food geeks like me and you and some of my friends, we love doing that kind of stuff.
We love that kind of stuff. Yeah.
But I mean, to be fair, Darren, we've really tried to make this more and more accessible to people. Mm-hmm. So, the first line of defense was to create these kits. And now we've created the pre-mixed curing salt. So you don't have to do all the math to figure out 3% and 0.25%, and you've got the safety built in with that. We added the sausage, the salumi blends, the spice blends a few years ago. We partnered with a really a great master of spice blending who has a lot of years of experience in the meat industry. And so he created these unique sausage blends for us for dry sausage. And then, he created more recently, the 3 charcuterie blends. So we're trying to make it so it's not quite a boxed cake mix, but closer. So all you have to do is go get, your 5 pounds of meat and then we give you everything else to be successful.
Actually, I'm testing out those 3 spices right now. The capicolas should be done, I'm hoping next week, probably the week after that. The Lonzino it's a thicker kind of thing, and the Bresaola is a much bigger thing. I actually got 5-pound pieces, so I could just do it in a massive bowl size. You don't have to do it that big, but those will be done by Christmas. I hope. I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the process was a little anticlimactic. I mean, it was so straightforward. It took me 5 minutes for the curing, and that included ruffling through rummaging through the cabinet to try to find his vacuum sealer in the first place. I mean, I pulled the vacuum sealer out and I just tossed the salt and the spice on there and rubbed it in and stuck it in a bag and vacuum sealed it. And that was 2 minutes. I mean, and that's the curing step done, and then leave it alone for 2 weeks. And then the drying part was another 10 minutes maybe. Yeah.
Well, I think the thing that people need to bear in mind is what we've seen with the company is dry aging first appealed to people who remembered what dry aged beef was, and then people who had the money who could buy a whole subprimal. So automatically our demographic was 40, 50, 60, 70. But when we introduced the charcuterie, we came down into the 20s, 30s, 40s, because people can afford to buy a piece of pork shoulder and cure it and go with that. So it's been really interesting to see which of the different product lines appeals to what portion of the population.
Well, and I think once people start getting educated, even on the full, subprimals or what have you, if they realize that, I'm going to be able to, it's going to spend a lot of money by getting that, but the end result's going to be so much better. I'm going to spend it anyway. over a certain amount of time, I might as well go ahead and jump on it and do it. All right. Well, I want to thank you both for being on. I really appreciate it. We've gone probably longer than I thought we both thought we would, but it's always great. I really love getting down into a lot of this stuff, and I definitely want to try some of the charcuterie stuff because I haven't done that before, and that's something I want to play around with, especially since I got a freezer full of beef out there, and I can play around with some of that stuff. So
great idea.
I want to make sure everybody follows you guys on YouTube, Umai Dry. Just check it out. Check out umaidry.com. You can check out all their products. You can also find them on Amazon. And then any other places out there that you guys know of that they can buy it?
Yeah, on our website, if they go to where to buy Umai Dry, there's a special page on there.
So you have local dealers and all that too?
Yeah, we're for the past 5 years, we've been slowly building our resale partner list. The vast majority of them are in other countries, but we have several in the US as well. So yeah, and if you want to get it close to home, talk to your local brewing supply shop or whatever and have them get in touch with us. That's a perfect place for Umai Dry.
Yep.
Have you guys also looked at like the barbecue stores and stuff like that?
Yep. Okay. That's another place. You'll find usually it takes a really inventive owner to want to take Umai Dry on as a product. So we are in some of the specialty barbecue stores, specialty gourmet kitchen stores, and some brewing stores. But again, it's not like you're never
going to be on a Walmart shelf.
We're not mainstream.
Right.
Yeah, we're not mainstream that way.
Well, I don't think you want to be, because then you get that liability thing. You want to make sure people know how to use your product.
Well, I'm not worried about the liability. I'm more worried about people being successful.
I don't mean financially liable. I mean more of, you want your name to be good out there, and you don't want people doing it wrong. And like you said before, doing it wrong without coming to you. And the more people you got, that have no clue what they're doing, and they just try it. Like you said, when Kenji,
and it's, the fact is it's not shake and bake. So
right. Exactly. It's not an oven roasting bag, and people will buy it and go, "Hey, this burned up," and I put it in the oven.
Which are really nice. They're really nice to have, but it's not. That's not Umai Dry. Also, another interesting thing leading up to the holidays. I mean, I don't know when you're going to broadcast this, but it always makes me laugh when I have people who want instant delivery of their Umai Dry purchase, because I'm like, I'm sorry, this is a product for really patient people, and you want us to deliver this within 24 hours. I'm like, something's wrong with this picture. So right. Yeah, that's why we call it the original slow food. There's nothing fast about dry aging. And
that's since I deal with sous vide a lot, I do a lot of people who are just getting into it, and that's one of the things that the biggest thing they get, have to get their mind wrapped around is that when you're cooking a steak, it's not just throwing it on the grill and it's done in 5 minutes.
No.
You're in there for 3 or 4 hours sometimes. And if you're doing a bigger piece of meat or a tougher piece of meat, you're cooking for 2 or 3 days. Yeah. So I mean, it's not fast food. It's the exact opposite. But,
exactly.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Dry aging is not like,
and then you got microwave.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like with dry aging. It's not like you stick it in a bag, put it in the refrigerator, and tomorrow it's a dry aged steak. That's not how it works. So
exactly.
Now people try to do it with certain additives and stuff like that, which it's not the same. I've tried it. People use fish sauce and koji rice and all kinds of stuff to kind of get that flavor, but it's not the same. It's similar. It can have umai flavor components to it because you're adding stuff to the meat, but
they're all really fun, aren't they?
Oh yeah, they're fun to try. That's why I love experimenting. I love doing all kinds of tests and stuff like that. And that's geeks like me do that. And I'm glad that you said that since you're out of the restaurant now, you can have more fun, because I was the same way when I was in the restaurant and my living depended on it. It was not as fun. And people always will say, "Oh, you should start a restaurant, or you should do this, or you should do that." It's like, no, it'll take all the fun out of everything.
No.
Kill the passion.
Exactly. But, I want to thank you guys both for being on. Make sure you guys check out the umaidry.com website. And also you can check them out on YouTube. Thanks again for being on. And anything else you want to mention before we?
No, thank you, Darren. Great. This was a really fun conversation. It was a joy to talk with you.
And I definitely will have you on again, maybe sometime next year, and we can talk about some new things that Armando has put into play. Since he's removing the number of bags and
Oh
stuff.
Who
man,
knows?
you're putting the pressure on me now. Okay.
I appreciate you being on. Thanks again. And thanks everybody for following the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. Well, thanks again for joining us, guys. We went a little long, but it was a great conversation with Thea and Amando. Make sure you check out Umai Dry in the links below for dry aging, pretty much anything you want to dry age, and the charcuterie. Make sure you check out the Fire and Water Cooking Facebook group, Facebook page, YouTube channel, and our Fire and Water Cooking website. And I'll see you again on the next Fire and Water Cooking Podcast.